Dutch people eat a lot of bread, breakfast and lunch and sometimes even dinner. And on a recent trip to the Netherlands, when I went to the bakkerij, the baker, to get a fresh loaf for breakfast, I saw all the different varieties, and one of them jumped out at me, casino brood. It's something I used to make but haven't made in a long time, so that's what we're making today. Hi, I'm Toine and welcome to my kitchen. If you're new to this channel, I focus on cooking foods from my home country, the Netherlands, and some of its former colonies, such as Indonesia. Casino brood is baked in a loaf pan with a lid, which gives it its iconic shape. It is a lot like a pain de mie in France or an American Pullman loaf. Let's get started. To make casino brood, you will need 490 grams of bread flour, 320 grams of milk, 50 grams of unsalted butter at room temperature, 10 grams of sugar, 10 grams of salt, and 5 grams of instant yeast. I've already have the bread flour in the bowl of my mixer. I have warmed my milk up to 44 degrees Celsius, 110 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to add the sugar on top, the salt on one side of the bowl, and the yeast on the other. And we're keeping it apart to make sure that the salt doesn't have time to kill the yeast. I'm going to put it on my stand mixer. Attach the dough hook. I'm going to start mixing it slowly and add my warm milk. You don't have to do this like a little bit at a time, but I like to start mixing before I add the milk. We're going to let this run until most of the loose flour is incorporated, but we don't quite have a nice dough ball, and that is when I will add the butter. So while it is mixing, one of the things that my mother used to make with casino brood was a tosti. And a tosti is basically a Dutch panini, and we had an iron that you would fold open, and we'll put a picture in here. You would put the bread in. My mom would do cheese, ham, and a little bit of mustard, and then put it over the fire, turning it over halfway so that both sides got nice and toasty, and that is what she would eat. I didn't eat cheese, so I often would get it with some tomato sauce and some cold cut of sorts. Okay, look, most of the dry flour is already being picked up. So I'm going to add little pieces of butter, one at a time, to the mixer. When I don't see a big clump of butter anymore, that is when I know it's time to add the next piece. This is a pretty wet dough, so most of the time I don't even have to scrape the edges of the bowl because it is such a sticky dough right now. All right, I'm going to add the next piece of butter. Okay, the last little bit of butter is going in. Now that all the butter is incorporated and it's starting to come together like a ball, I'm going to increase the speed and let it knead for 10 minutes. The dough has been kneading for 10 minutes, so I'm gonna turn off the mixer, move it to the side. And I'm going to put it on my work surface, and I'm going to turn it into a ball. So make a little bit of a disc and just pull and move to the center as you go around the disc. Doesn't have to be perfect. Turn it over so the seam side is down, and I'm going to rotate it with my pinkies touching the counter and the dough to put some tension on the top. You can see that the tension is increasing. Make sure it doesn't tear. If you go too tight, the outer layer can tear. So this looks very good. I'm going to put the ball of dough seam side down in my mixing bowl. Cover the bowl with a damp towel And I'm putting this in a warm, draft-free place for 40 minutes for its first rise. Okay, the first rise has finished. I'm going to take the dough ball out of my mixing bowl, put it seam side up, and now with my hands I am going to flatten it into a circle, or close to a circle as I can get it. And I've done this before with a witbrood recipe, sorry. And we're going to take this edge of the circle, the right top edge, and stretch it and fold it down. The same with the left side. Stretch it out, fold it down. Kind of a really weird shaped trapezoid. I'm going to push down on the seams. And now we're going to roll it from the narrow side, the farthest away from me, all the way towards the bottom. And every time I do a little roll, I'm going to push the seam down with my thumbs and stretch it out a little bit to put some tension on there. So roll it, push it down and away, sealing the seam and putting tension on the top. And we're going to keep doing that. Until we're all the way at the end. Now I'm just going to roll it so that the edges become pointy, stretching it out a little bit. And now I'm going to pinch the seam to make sure it is completely sealed, roll it a little bit more, and then put it seams down on a cookie sheet that has parchment paper on it. Going to cover it with the damp towel, put it back in a warm draft-free place for another 40 minutes. Our dough is almost done with its second rise, so it's time to butter the pan, the loaf pan. This is a Pullman loaf pan that has a lid. We're going to remove the lid and get a little bit of butter, it's really soft, into the pan. And I just like to use my fingers to rub this all around to make sure we have a good amount of butter on the sides, the bottom, and also on the inside of the lid. So we'll get there in a second. This loaf pan happens to have little diagonal ridges. Not all of them do. It's not important to have that or not have. It doesn't make a difference. This puts a little bit of a pattern on the outside of the bread. Okay. Make sure you get in the corners, because that is often where the bread can get stuck, and then when you try to remove it, it will rip, and that is not what we want. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit more butter for the bottom. Ours has little holes in the bottom that helps venting it. Not all of them do. I've only ever used ones with holes, but I would imagine the ones without the holes will work just as well. Supposedly they're there to let the steam out a little bit. I have probably enough butter left on my hand to put it on the inside of the lid. Okay, I'm going to wash my hands and then we will shape the dough and put it in the tin. Let's take a look at the dough. It has risen a good amount, which is great. So I am going to invert it onto my work surface. So let's move this out of the way. Like that. And we are going to push it flat, degas it. Oh, you could actually hear the gas leaving, leaving the dough. And we're trying to make it nice and long. Picking it up and kind of letting gravity do some of the work is a good trick on stretching it out and making it longer. Now that I have a nice long strip of dough. What I'm going to do is push it out away from me at the top and towards me at the bottom to make this this distance wider. So just like this. We're going to fold this dough into a trapezoid again, and the longer side has to be as wide as the pan, or maybe a little bit wider. It's okay if it is just a little bit wider, but you don't want it to be too wide. So I'm going to take this right side, fold it over, and line this up. I'm going to take the left side, fold it over, and just make sure that this fits the pan, and it does. So now, just like when we hit a circle, I'm going to push on the seam to kind of crimp it together. And now we're going to start to roll from here, from the top, the part that's furthest away from me, towards myself. And again, push down on the seam to create tension. Roll it. Push down on the seam. Take your roll, make it seam side up, and crimp the seam with your fingers like this. And I like to just give it a little bit of a roll to smooth it out. And now, seam side down. In the pan, we're going to slide the lid on it, and our pan has a little indent, so I hope you can hear it when you push it close. That is very important because that is what will keep the lid on while the dough is rising and while you're baking the bread. This is going in the same warm, draft-free spot for an hour for its final rise. The last rise is done, and while you may be tempted to open the pan to take a look, please don't, because it could potentially ruin the crust on the top. While the dough was rising, I preheated our oven to 210 degrees Celsius, 410 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'm going to bake the bread at that temperature for 10 minutes. Then I will lower the temperature of the oven to 190 degrees Celsius or 375 degrees Fahrenheit and continue baking it for another 20 to 30 minutes until the internal temperature reaches 95 degrees Celsius or 203 degrees Fahrenheit. All right, time to put it in the oven. The bread has been baking for 10 minutes, so now I'm lowering the temperature to 190 degrees Celsius or 375 degrees Fahrenheit. The bread has finished baking, and we need to take it out of the pan right away, otherwise it's going to steam. So just turn it over, and I like to keep the top on the top. You can see that it rose all the way to the top, so we have a nice flat top of the pan. We have a nice flat top. And now the hardest part, we're going to let this completely cool before we can start cutting into it. I'll see you in a while. The bread has completely cooled off, so let's cut off a slice. I always like it crunchy, so. You can see the crumb is nice and tight. Smells really good. Let me have a little piece without anything on it. Eet Smakelijk. The crust is not too thick, has a little bit of a crunch to it, and the inside is nice and fluffy and has a really nice flavor. I always like a little bit of butter on fresh bread. Nothing more is needed really. Yeah, that's definitely delicious. I can't wait to finish this. While it's great with just a little bit of butter, I do have some hagelslag in the pantry, and I may treat myself with a little butter and hagelslag on the rest of this slice. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please click the like and subscribe button and don't forget to share it with your friends. If you have any memories of casino brood or questions about the recipe, please post them in the comments below. I will post the written recipe on my website toineskitchen.com in both metric and imperial measurements, and you can find me on social media as well. If you do make this bread, I would love it if you can take a photo and post it on Instagram with the hashtag Toines Kitchen. I will share it in my story and on my website. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.